now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Terry Hildebrandt. I'm the Director of Evidence-Based Coaching at the Fielding Graduate University. And tonight is January 15th, 2020. Happy New Year, everyone. We're very excited about tonight's guest speaker. She is an alum of Fielding's doctoral program and has done some really groundbreaking work in research on coaching abrasive leaders, and has created her own institute called the Boss Whispering Institute, and has a formal training program for coaches who are interested in working with abrasive leaders. So tonight, Dr. Laura Crawshaw will be talking about her work and giving us all some insights in how to coach abrasive leaders. So welcome, Dr. Crawshaw, and I'm going to turn it over to you for any other additional introductions that you might like to make, and we are thrilled to have you here tonight. And tonight's presentation is titled Evidence-Based Coaching Thought Leaders Webinar on Coaching Abrasive Leaders Dealing with Defensiveness. So welcome, Dr. Laura.
Thank you very much. You can hear me, yes?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes, all right, good. Well, I just want to tell you what a pleasure it is to talk to fellow Fieldingites. That's what we used to call ourselves back in the day. And I actually completed my doctorate in 2005. So even before the evidence-based coaching program began. So I haven't had the pleasure of meeting all of you, but I want to thank you for this opportunity. What I'd like to do is I have some PowerPoints, and doesn't everybody? And I'd like to kind of go through the presentation and then take your questions at the end. Let's see. How's that looking? Are you able to all see that, Terry? Can you?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. And yeah, so because I'd like to share the concepts with you, and I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. I think much of what you see here might be familiar because as coaches, you know, I'm certainly certain that you have encountered abrasive leaders or worked with individuals who work for them. So not all of this will be new to you, but you know, let's take it away. Who am I anyway? So I'm the founder of the Boss Whispering Institute. I started out as a psychotherapist, and then I was a corporate executive. So I'm fluent in both languages, the language of emotions and also the language of, you know, the corporate world, and researcher, executive coach, and author. And the mission of the Institute is to relieve suffering in the workplace caused by abrasive leaders. So I started out as a clinical social worker, and that's the bleeding heart side of me that I also have to reconcile with the executive side. The Institute's dedicated to research and training in the field of coaching abrasive leaders. And we're the first to ever do so, and I'll talk more about that, because before I developed this method, there was no defined method for coaching abrasive leaders. You'll notice I don't refer to them as bullies or bully bosses. I think that's implies intent. And so we can all be abrasive. And these individuals have certain characteristics that I identified. So my work is based on research. I've coached probably going on 500 of them by now. And we're including not only executives, excuse me, but also professionals such as physicians, academics, and attorneys. So let's get some definitions up here. I define an abrasive leader as anyone charged with formal or informal authority whose interpersonal behavior causes emotional distress in others sufficient to disrupt organizational functioning. So we're not talking about the mildly irritating individual. We're talking about people who leave deep interpersonal wounds and who behave in ways that disrupt organizational functioning. And again, I don't use the term bully. I do use the term workplace bullying because in the research literature, that's you know, the term that's used, but I'm not willing to call people bullies. So I'm also going to be talking about leadership. And when I talk about leadership, I'm talking about the abrasive individual superiors, upper management. I also differentiate between performance, which is the execution of the technical aspects of one's work. Say if you're a software developer, that's your work developing the software, versus conduct. Sorry, hold on just a minute. Versus conduct, interpersonal behavior with coworkers, clients, customers. And what we find is that organizations are, pretty comfortable managing performance, but not so comfortable managing the conduct of their employees. I'll talk more about that later on. So here we have again the definition, and what we're looking at are chronic patterns of abrasive behavior. The behavior can be directed at their own employees, their direct reports, or peers, or superiors. It depends. And they don't really see themselves as abrasive. They see their style as necessary. And in my doctoral analysis of my cases, many viewed it not only as necessary, but sort of noble. I do what it takes to get the job done. So just to lay out some abrasive behaviors, you might think, as in terms of past clients you've worked with, what kind of behaviors might they have engaged in? And what we see are behaviors like shouting or swearing, storming out of meetings, name calling, ignoring or shunning coworkers, intimidation. It sounds like somebody needs to put their mute on. Just getting a little music in the background, and I'm not ready to sing yet. So intimidation, glaring, or snorting. I've been in situations in my executive career where there were snorters in the room. Over control, sarcasm or hostile humor, public humiliation, singling someone out in front of others to dress them down, maligning another's character, reputation, inappropriate sexual comments or behavior. Yes, this also constitutes abrasive behavior. Making threats, throwing objects, hitting objects, the old table pounders, or hitting people. So these are the kinds of behaviors that one encounters in terms of, abrasive behavior. It's behavior that rubs people the wrong way. And oftentimes people talk about conflict in the workplace, and I want to differentiate conflict versus abrasion. The conflict is it a dispute over a given issue, and if it's addressed in a civil manner, that's acceptable conflict? Or are we looking at a symptom of a chronically abrasive management style? And so do coworkers perceive that interpersonal interactions are disrespectful? And also, does this quote-unquote conflict occur with more than one person? So usually you'll see that abrasive leaders, or I work primarily with leaders because that's who the company wants to invest in, but are these abrasive individuals, there tends to be a pattern, and they don't direct their behavior towards simply one person. And it will be a continuing pattern of coworker distress that will be identified. So a lot of people can be subjected to this behavior. When I did a meta-analysis of the cases that I'd worked with during, my doctoral studies, there were some major behaviors. One was overreaction, over control, making threats. If you can't do it, I'll get someone who can. Public humiliation was another major theme, and also condescension, taking a very superior attitude toward others and condescending. So what are some symptoms of chronic abrasion? One is the organization will receive continuing informal or formal complaints, which in the boss whispering method we call negative perceptions. And you'll see that that's a very important concept when working with an abrasive leader. Negative perceptions voiced by employees. You'll see that individuals try and transfer out of a department or avoid being transferred in, increased attrition and sick leave. When someone shows up on the job, they'll be cautioned, watch out for him, don't get in his way, or don't get on her bad side, you'll pay if you do. a lot of leadership time devoted to addressing the resulting distress. And what happens is, I've seen it over and over again, is leadership loses credibility. The failure to intervene is interpreted as weakness on leadership's part, or worse, tacitly condoning the behaviors. So these situations, you see so much suffering. And I'll just speak briefly that I started out as an EAP counselor up in Alaska at the very beginning of my career. And my thought was that, gee, I'd be talking to people of employee assistance program about their personal problems. And yet people would come in and talk about the pain they were suffering at work. And in my book, Taming the Abrasive Manager, I talk about how we had individuals who would come into the EAP, someone who came in and said, I'm really angry at my boss. And I would say, why is that? Well, he humiliates me, calls me names, does this, very extreme scenarios. And I'd say, so what can I help you with? And he said, I'm thinking of killing him. And I said, have you thought of how you might do that? And he said, yes, my gun's out in my truck. And that was way back in the 70s. That was when I first encountered this kind of suffering. And my questions then were, number one, why would a boss ever treat their employee this way? And secondly, he had reported this to the employer. They didn't do anything about it. So those were kind of the driving questions that I had. And I got a reputation for working with difficult leaders. And as I kept working with them, they became my greatest teachers. I owe them a lot because it was through listening to them that I learned why they behave the way they do. And also I learned from the employers why they didn't intervene with this behavior, which I'll share with you further. So I'm not going to lay on a lot of statistics, but this is a pretty important study where 775 business people were subjected to abrasive behavior and asked how they responded. And what they found was 48% intentionally decreased their work effort, 47% decreased their time at work, 38% decreased the quality of their work, because why would you want to work so hard if you're being treated badly? 63% lost work time avoiding the offender, 66% said their performance declined, and 78% said their commitment to the organization declined, and 12% left their job because of the experience. So this behavior is very costly to organizations, and even more so now as we enter, sort of the Me Too era, where leaders are increasingly being held accountable for their conduct in the workplace. So the question is, what causes this abrasive leadership behavior? And if you look, when I was doing my doctoral work back in 2000, early 2000, I started looking around and discovered there was no literature on it. There was only popular literature. And when you look at the popular literature on leaders, what you find is that there are two prevailing theories. One is that they behave this way because they're mentally disordered. They're psychopaths, they're sociopaths, etc. So one prevailing popular theory was that they're mentally disordered. Here's another nice example of that. I love these boss monster illustrations. So mentally disordered, or if they're not mentally disordered, they're morally disordered. They're brutal. They're predators. And there were these kinds of books, were very prevalent. Just saying, they're snakes in suits. They love tormenting their coworkers. They're deeply sadistic. So either mentally disordered or morally disordered. Or the third theory is, well, they're just plain you-know-whats. They're just plain assholes, which I don't think is a really kind of deep analysis of the phenomenon, but then, they're just jerks. That's what's going on. So the common assumptions about abrasive leaders are, first of all, that they're fully aware. If you look at this literature, the belief is they know exactly what they're doing. They're fully aware of the nature of their abrasive behavior and the impact it has on people. And their intent is malevolent. They do it to harm people. And the means, how do they do it? Through domination, being controlling, through aggression and intimidation. And also that this behavior is intractable. They cannot change. It's hopeless and we are helpless. Well, I started talking. I had clients who were abrasive and who were referred to me because of their, you know, aggressive leadership behaviors. And I just sat and listened, and I asked them why. I was very curious, and that's one of the driving approaches in boss whispering. And what I found, first of all, was that they had little or no awareness of the nature and impact of abrasive behaviors. They were clueless. How did I discover this? What I would do is, with their permission, I would interview maybe 10 of their coworkers, take all of that data, put it into themes, purge it of identifying information, and bring it back to them. So they would get a very lengthy feedback summary that had themes like public humiliation or uses profanity or poor emotional control, and publicly humiliates. And when I brought this feedback, they would go into shock. They would say, I can't believe people see me this way. It's not my intent to do harm. And I'll show you some more examples of this. Well, what was their intent? So I said, okay, well, so why do you single someone out in front of everybody else? Or why do you, because they would acknowledge, yeah, I use profanity, or I yell, or I do whatever. And they say, well, you need to do what it takes to get the job done. And what I discovered was that these were individuals who were defending against the threat of being perceived to be incompetent. They did not want to be perceived to be incompetent, and they felt very threatened or afraid. And it's kind of hard to think of them as being afraid because they look so confident, but there's all this anxiety underneath about, I've got to get the job done. Though my objectives cannot be threatened. So the means were the same, to dominate through aggression, intimidation. And what I also discovered was that the behavior was coachable, that the majority can change. First of all, these are pretty bright people who achieve these leadership positions. So that's why I went to fielding, because my question was, I seem to be doing and saying things that were helping them turn around their management style. And so I came to fielding to answer the question of, what the heck am I doing and why is it working anyway? That's what I wanted to title my dissertation, but you have to give dissertations fancier titles. So anyway. So when we look at adequate leaders, and in my book I talk about kind of, adequate leaders. Adequate leaders, what they do is, if they see a problem, if someone's not performing the way they think they should, they get curious and they say, why is this person not performing? Perhaps the person's unable, or perhaps they're unwilling. Maybe they're unable because they don't have the resources or they don't have the training. And then adequate leaders, confident leaders, will stay calm and address the problem. They'll provide resources or training, or if the person's unwilling or not doing the job, they'll stay very calm, use a disciplinary process, and set limits and consequences for unacceptable performance. Well, as I said, I was living up in Alaska for many years, and I've had encounters with grizzly bears, which also influenced my thinking about it. What abrasive leaders do is, again, they see a problem. Someone's not doing what I want them to do. And they would immediately diagnose incompetence, which took the form of saying that people don't do what I want because they are stupid or lazy. They are incompetent. And then they would attack. They would attack the perceived incompetence, and they would try and dominate through these intimidating threat displays. Let's call it barking or biting, otherwise known as bullying behaviors. And so this just fascinated me that they lacked psychological insight. They were not calm. They felt so threatened if the employees were not performing, or whoever it was, their superiors sometimes, or peers. So out of this whole concept, I was sort of psychoanalytically trained, and Freud had an approach that really was helpful. So what I do is I say to my clients, I say, what what does a mouse feel when it sees a cat? All right. And they say, well, it feels afraid. All right. And so, so it feels afraid, it feels anxiety. So when an organism perceives a threat, it feels anxiety. And how can a mouse defend itself against the threat of the cat? And my clients would say, well, it could run away. That's one defense. And I'd say, right, flight, correct? And then if they had little, spears or machine guns, what else could they do? And my clients would say, well, they could fight. Okay, so what you're saying, or what I would point out to them, I'm saying, so you're telling me that when any organism perceives a threat, it feels anxiety or fear, and it strives to defend itself through fight or flight, correct? And they get this. We all get this. Well, this is actually Freud's theory of anxiety and the mechanisms of defense, because he started out as a biologist, and then he translated his understanding into psychology. So when we look into nature, if an organism perceives a physical threat, the mouse sees the cat, it feels fear and strives to defend itself. Well, Freud pointed out that if we perceive psychological threats, our anxiety level goes up, and the most primitive defenses are fight or flight. And this is what I saw going on. If they felt threatened by others' perceived incompetence of others, they would go into fight mode. So I taught them this, the old mouse and the cat. I taught them this threat anxiety defense dynamic. So I'm going to skip this. So again, what were they afraid of? What was a threat? They were perceived as afraid of being perceived to be incompetent. And these leaders, they're quite insecure. So what I understood is these leaders were not evil. They just wanted to go about their business, much like the grizzly bears that I had encountered in my travels through the wilderness. Their business is survival. If they exert dominance, then they have superior fitness, and they were defending against threats to their survival, the bears in the wild or the executives in the workplace with aggression. And you would pay if you got in their way. So what I came to understand was this abrasive behavior is defensive behavior. And once I taught them this threat anxiety defense dynamic, they could use that lens to start analyzing their own behavior and others' behavior. So I'll give you an example. An employee calls a coworker stupid. Okay, now is that fight or flight behavior? Well, it's fight mode. And then why would an employee call a coworker stupid? What threat is that employee fighting or defending against? Why are they going into fight mode? An employee storms out of a meeting, all right? Fight or flight? Well, this is flight. And what threat are they fleeing or defending against? So what I would share this lens with the individuals, and they would start analyzing other people's behavior first. And I'll show you an example of that. So the coaching focus was to have them start observing the psychodynamics, in other words, the fight or flight behaviors, and analyze the underlying threats. Now, the nice thing is that because we have bigger brains, we're not consigned to simply primitive psychological fight or flight defenses. We have the third option, which is working through. And that is that you'll see with confident leaders when they perceive that people in the workplace are anxious, whether it's about a layoff or a rumor, the leader will calmly bring people together and help them work through their anxiety or work through issues around a troubling project or whatever. So what I saw was that these leaders started abandoning their fight behaviors and learning how to calm themselves down and work through threatening issues calmly. just very quickly, what are some other contributors to abrasive styles? What I discovered was many of these people grew up in families where it was a very harsh environment. And abrasive styles were acceptable and normal. I had one vice president who said, look, when I was a kid, my dad kicked my ass, and look where I am today, vice president. So for him, this ass kicking, barking, and biting style, this aggression, was normal and productive. Cultural styles can vary in what might be considered acceptable versus abrasive behaviors. I've had companies call me up and say, we want to refer someone to you, and they're from New York. Now, my parents are New Yorkers, and New Yorkers tend to be known as being very cut to the chase and direct, but the culture, different international cultural styles can vary. I also found that some people hold the misconception that being direct excuses abrasive behavior. So my clients would say, well, I don't believe in sugarcoating things. And then they'd say something that was incredibly rude, and wounding because, hey, I'm not going to sugarcoat. Another issue was so many of these individuals never learned how to work through issues. So they never learned non-abrasive alternatives. And so out of ignorance, they would just default to this abrasive style, resorting to aggression or fight behaviors. And also that many people focus solely on the deliverables, and they were unaware of the impact of their behavior. So they'd say things like, look, I'm here to get the job done, not mess with all this touchy-feely stuff. I had one client who said at the beginning, he said, are you going to try and turn me into Mr. Cupcake? And I said, no. I said, I want to make you more powerful than you already are. And he said, what do you mean? I said, right now, when you try and pursue your objectives, everybody has these negative perceptions about you. You saw that in the feedback. I want people to be focused on your objectives, not on all of these negative perceptions. So, you have to kind of be able to stand up to them at the beginning. Why are they clueless? Why don't they see the impact of their behavior? And some do to a degree, but then they kind of rationalize it. What I discovered is they really lack capacity for empathy, to be able to put themselves in other people's shoes and understand how their words or actions might be affecting other people. So they lack that social sonar. They didn't read emotions. We coaches, we're always reading people's emotions and how are people reacting. We have well-developed antenna, which they do not. Also, they would discount the importance of emotions. It was sort of like, oh, leave your emotions at the door, or emotions signify weakness. So they weren't interested in paying attention to people's emotions, and they paid a great price for that. Now, very briefly, why didn't leadership do anything about these people? Why would they wait till things got so terrible to finally do something and refer these individuals for coaching? Well, the popular theories are, again, that these companies, they're evil and they don't care about people and they're just slave drivers. But what I found was that the upper management was afraid. They felt hopeless and helpless. They were afraid that if they did intervene, in other words, sit the individual down and set limits and consequences and for continued unacceptable conduct, and then refer them for coaching, they were afraid they might get sued, they'd be harmed, they'd be sabotaged, or my employee would, the guy who reports to me would get angry with me, it'd ruin our relationship, or they were afraid of doing harm. I'd hear things like, oh, well, she's never done it to me, or he's going through a divorce, I don't want to make life harder. And what they did not see was all of the suffering in the coworkers. Another reason they might have tried something, they might have sent the person off for some kind of ineffective management training, But usually when they would try and intervene, they were blocked by the abrasive leader's denial of the behavior. So it was like if they would try and talk with somebody and say, look, there are a lot of negative perceptions about your management style, and we're getting a lot of complaints. I didn't say that. I didn't do that. It's their issue. They're lazy, stupid, incompetent, or whatever. So the leadership didn't get very far. Another big problem is that leadership will say things like, well, I can't do anything because, it's just hearsay. And I spend a lot of time educating employers on, look, negative perceptions do tremendous damage and are doing tremendous. You're losing good people and all those costs that I cited before. You don't need to have been there and observed the behaviors to intervene. You can, and I train them on how to do that. Another is that employers think, oh, people can't change, which is foolish. People can change, and they do if they're motivated. And they also believe that the only thing they can do to end this workplace bullying is terminate the person. And so that's where coaching really offers hope and empowers the organization to intervene. So just very quickly, what I want to say is back when I did my dissertation, I wrote it, and guess what? Nobody read it. Surprise. So then I thought, okay, I'll write a book, which I wrote the book. And then I waited for the Today Show to call me up to do interviews, and nobody called. And I knew I'd stumbled on a way of working with these individuals that would relieve suffering. So my work at Fielding served as the framework. And so then I built the method and started training coaches. So how does the coaching work? Let's get down to the brass tacks here. It's action research, which is self-reflective inquiry undertaken by participants in social situations. So what you're doing is you're engaging as a co-researcher with your client. So when clients get referred to me or people I've trained, usually they're mystified. I don't know why they referred me. Nobody's really given me feedback. They weren't specific. They're just saying I'm abrasive, or that they're getting a lot of complaints and now my job's on the line, and I don't get it. So what what I offer, what the method offers is I say, look, you don't know what the negative perceptions are about you, do you, in great detail? And they'll say no. So I'll say, this is what this process offers. Number one, you and I, if you want to work with me, we need to figure out what are the negative perceptions. What are they? Secondly, what's causing them? Why do they exist? Why is your employer now saying, you've got to change your management style? And thirdly, once we do steps 1 and 2, what strategies can we develop to eliminate these negative perceptions permanently? So this method does not judge, it does not accuse them, it does not convict them of management crimes. It simply asks them if they'd like to engage as a co-researcher in a confidential process to help them gain insight into what's going on, why they're perceived as abrasive. So I said before, these people lack psychological insight, even though they're cognitively usually very bright. And an example would be one executive I worked with, this is a brilliant guy. And he said to me, I don't get it. When I ask my senior management team for input, no one speaks up. Now, I had interviewed them, and, he was physically imposing. He was brilliant. He had a photographic memory. This is a very bright man. And he says to me, I don't get it. When I ask my team for input, no one speaks up. And in true coaching fashion, we ask, why do you think that is? All right. And over and over again, people would say, he said, they're lazy. I said, okay, that's theory 1. I said, can you think of any other reason they might not speak up when you ask your senior management team for input? And sure enough, he said, they're stupid. And I mean, he didn't have any psychological insight. He had no understanding that they were afraid. when I interviewed them, they said he will attack you. He has a photographic memory. If you get anything wrong, he'll dress you down in front of everybody else. You know, it's terrifying working with him. He didn't understand that. So how do we get him to understand? So I'm just going to show this very quickly to you, which is the way the method works. You get a call from the sponsor. That might be HR or the client's manager. And then you spend some time consulting with them on how they need to intervene, how they need to sit down and set limits and consequences. They need to talk with the individual and say, you can't continue like this. We cannot continue to get these negative perceptions. And if we do, there are consequences. This is what motivates these individuals to engage in coaching. And if the employer is not willing to do this, the coaching will not work. And we tell them that up front. So we don't accept referrals if they just, because employers would try and send you these clients and you'd ask them, well, have you talked to them about, the complaints or abrasive behavior? No, we want you to do that. No, the employer has to do their part. They have to intervene. Then we have a conversation with the client and answer every single question they have to see if they want to go ahead. If they choose to proceed, then we do coworker interviews. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. And you can see then we go into the assessment phase where I meet with a client and take work history. I used to do this in person, but you don't need to be there in person anymore because you can do this like through Zoom, whatever. Then I interview a lot of coworkers and touch base with the sponsor and then the client. You put together a very specific feedback summary. You deliver the feedback. And then the third phase is when you go into the coaching phase and you decide which is the most urgent theme to work on. You introduce that threat anxiety dynamic as the theoretical framework, and then the insight cycle, which I'll show you in a minute. So once you've worked with the individual and they start developing insight, which is pretty exciting for them, then I go back and re-interview the coworkers, and then take that data in the same way, purge it of identifying information, and let the client see the fruit of their labors. And then the coaching will conclude after that. What's so shocking is how quickly the coaching goes. Usually it's done within like 8 to 10 sessions because they've internalized how to analyze behavior and how to monitor and manage their own behavior, which is part of emotional intelligence. So again, first there has to be a trusting alliance with the client where you ask them, I'd like you to engage me as your co-researcher so that we can discover the exact nature of these damaging negative perceptions that are damaging their career now and find out what generates them. Once we do that, we can work to develop strategies to eliminate these negative perceptions. And it has to be, of course, confidential. Nothing is shared. Do the coworker assessment, and detailed feedback is critically important for these individuals. They have to see exactly what they do and say that causes these negative perceptions. So they learn exactly what causes them, and then we get to work on them. So this is, for instance, this is what a theme might look like: publicly humiliates. He will dress people down with other employees present. In a meeting, he told one person they were worthless. If someone makes a mistake, he'll bring it up in meetings. He'll say, how did you ever come up with a stupid idea like that? If somebody says something that he perceives as contradictory, he enjoys humiliating you like a cat toying with a mouse. People are terrified to say anything. They just clam up, which again, that's flight behavior, clamming up. So bringing this feedback, the client perceives me as an ally who's there to help eliminate these negative perceptions. And when they see this feedback, this is what would break through their denial. This was key. So then they learn to develop what is called empathic accuracy using this TAD dynamic. And they gain psychological insight. So here you see that case I talked about, when my team asks for input, no one speaks up. Theory 1, why do you think that is? They're lazy, they're stupid. And theory 3, he got it. He said, now I get it. They're afraid. They're afraid I'll criticize them. That's why. Because what I said to him, I said, this not speaking up. Would you call that fight behavior or flight behavior? And he calls, well, it's like flight. They're clamming up. And I said, okay, well, let's back into that. They must be anxious about something. They must be anxious. What could they be afraid of? What's the threat? And very quickly they'll see that they're the threat. That they'll analyze other people's behavior and get it right this time. So then the next step is developing strategies. So what strategies could reduce the perception of threat? How could you, deal with a performance problem without publicly humiliating? And they'll say, well, I didn't mean to publicly humiliate the person. Well, now they have insight. They say, I realize if I have a problem with someone, I could address it behind closed doors. And you'd think they'd get this, but they don't until you help them develop insight. I realize I can't call people names. If I think someone has a stupid idea, I need to bring them around without making them feel stupid. So what you see is this wonderful transition from the crusader for competence, where it's off with their heads and let's attack them to get them to be competent, into what I call the gentle educator, where essentially that executive, I had to point out to him, I said, look, you know more than they do. You're brilliant. Oh, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. You know more than them, and that's a lonely position to be in. So what are you going to do with people who aren't as bright as you? Are you going to attack them, or are you going to help them? You're going to become the educator. This is the second pillar of the method, which is the insight cycle. All right. So the client will observe behavior. They don't speak up. And then the coach says, the coach has educated them on the TAD dynamic, the cat and mouse thing. He says, why do you think, I'll use my Viennese accent, why do you think they don't speak up? And so then they develop theories on that. Well, maybe they're lazy, or maybe they're afraid, or maybe this or that. And so then we work with the client to help them reduce other people's anxiety. And how could you achieve your objectives without people fighting or fleeing you? And then they test the strategy. So this is the action research piece. Pretty cool. Anyway, let's see. It's very respectful process. It's confidential. We're trying to develop psychological insight. The pulse check, is important for helping get them further feedback, and then the coaching concludes. So again, boss whispering, the employer has to be a participant in this process. We won't take the case if they don't. It can move very quickly, 8 to 10 sessions. I tell employers you should see demonstrable change by the third session. Because these individuals, once they see the feedback, they start changing, sometimes based on that right away. I would say around 82% achieve an acceptable level of conduct, and more research is being done on our work that shows that these coaching clients, they retain the insight and they retain their emotional management ability. So if the employer does intervene and offer coaching, everyone wins, because the employee suffering ends, because the employees are heartened that the formerly abrasive leader cared enough to work to change. It's so exciting. They'll say, what did you do? You can tell he's trying really hard, or she's really working to change. The employees regard the employer positively for intervening. And the formerly abrasive leader is grateful for the employer's willingness to invest in him or her and offer a second chance through coaching. And also the employer reduces their potential for litigation and, et cetera. And they get to keep the leader's technical expertise. But what happens if the title should come up here? But what happens if the coaching, the person can't turn it around? Well, employee suffering ends. Employees regard the employer positively for intervening. The employer reduces the potential for litigation, and the employer, even if they have to terminate the person, because coaching doesn't work in every single situation, they have the peace of mind of knowing that they did everything in their power to remedy the situation. They did everything they could do if they have to terminate. So I've come to the end. And if you want to communicate with me, feel free to just email me at crawshaw@bosswhispering.com. My book talks about my journey of discovery. It does not go into the mechanics of the coaching process in great detail. So once I wrote the book and everything, then I taught the course for a number of years, and now I've put it online. So people all over the world are now taking this course. It's self-paced. And if you want to read more in more depth about the method, go to the website, and on the research and publications page, you can download for free my article on coaching abrasive leaders using action research to increase productivity and reduce suffering in the workplace. So that's it. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up for questions. And anyway, who would like to ask a question?
And by the way, if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute yourself using the buttons on the lower left. And you're welcome to also turn on your video if you like. That could make it a little bit more personable during this Q&A section.
Right.
And also, I mentioned this earlier, but some folks have joined late. So if you would like the 1 hour of ICF continuing education credit, please put your email address in the chat room. That way Dr. Laura can send you a certificate later.
Right. Okay, let me rattle through some of the questions I've got here just very quickly, because you did type them in. Yes. Is narcissism a factor? This coaching is an educational process. It's not a psychotherapeutic process. And I think oftentimes narcissism is based on insecurity. So I tend to focus on the fact that these are, I don't encounter a lot of narcissistic personality disorders at all. What I encounter are people who feel very anxious and who want to be perceived as competent. And it has to start with our having empathy for them, believe it or not, to be really able to help them. So I don't necessarily agree with the imposter syndrome proposal here. Let's see. I notice a pronoun of he. What percentage of your clients are female? Well, it's I don't know. I would say maybe 80% men, 30% female, but other members of the Institute have, differing responses on that, I'm sure. Laura, do you find that once a client changes their behavior consistently, their coworkers are willing to change their perceptions of the person? I have found that people are sometimes unwilling to change or update perceptions. Yes, that does occur. Sometimes the wounds are so deep that people are not willing to change their perceptions. But what I find more is that people are so relieved at, first of all, the company bringing a coach in. They're finally doing something. Secondly, that when the coach interviews them and collects all of this data, so often the coworkers will say, oh my God, I can't believe somebody's finally listening to what I've been going through. And then the most thrilling part is when the abrasive leader starts changing. When I do the pulse check, they'll say he or she really listen. You can see she's working, she's not doing this, or she stopped doing that, or he stopped doing that. So it's so therapeutic because they are participants in the action research process as well. But sometimes the wounds are too deep. I've worked with many abrasive female leaders who, as Margaret Albright said, have a special place in hell. Okay, that's kind of more, I don't know what to say about that, but the question is, how do the employees set the limits? No, it's the employer. It's the employer who sits down and says, look, your performance may be great, but your conduct is not. And this is not acceptable. You need to turn around your management style. We cannot have these continuing complaints. We want to offer you help to do that. We hope you accept it. But whether or not you accept the coaching, we will not continue to tolerate these negative perceptions. And work has to be done with the employers to kind of help them say that. Okay, I think I got through all the questions here. What other questions?
Hi, I have another follow-on question.
Sure.
Hi, it's Laura here, Sarah Boaz. So I asked the one about changing perceptions on the part of the co-workers. That was very helpful reply, thank you. Mm-hmm. I was also wondering about this point about the necessity of the employer really challenging the abrasive manager before agreeing to coach, which makes perfect sense to me. I am often asked to coach senior managers who kind of turn out to be quite abrasive, and so it's definitely been a big part of my experience, but it's hardly ever been explicitly what I was initially brought in for. What I have found over the years is that most of those people are actually suffering from it themselves. I completely agree with you that they're often not aware of their behaviors or the impact, but even outside the workplace as well, the same kinds of patterns are playing out. And I found that they're often quite conscious of it. And so what I've often found is that I'll engage in a broader conversation about their relationships, and especially kind of close and intimate relationships. And that's where they will come up with this kind of problem diagnosis themselves. And then we might look back at how those patterns relate to the workplace. So I guess the question is very broad one. It's like, how does that relate to your experience?
Well, in my book, I talk about a breakthrough case. I had an abrasive leader who treated his employees like little children. And he infantilized them, and he would rage at them. And one day, I was a psychotherapist, and I do not engage in psychotherapy, so I tend not to, ask about family relationships or whatever. He came in and he said, "I realize now why I treat my employees that way." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Because I was treated that way. I was treated." And so sometimes they will surface that information, and that's the evolution of insight that they're having. But what I find to be, first of all, it's very important when the employer calls to really determine whether or not they're abrasive or not. I have questionnaires that can be asked about their behavior. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I lost my thought now. There you have it.
Well, I think it was related back to that point that, as I imagine, that you've found over the years that it's more useful to get the employer to insist that the employer actually addresses.
Well, I just simply say this method will not work because they have, I have no power over that client. I'm not going to motivate them to change. I'm not going to, who am I? I'm just a coach. But and they tend to be in such denial, so many of them, they're so unaware that it really has to come from the employer. That's where the motivation comes. And so the call, then the individual call me and say, well, my employer says, I don't know, they're saying something about, me, and I suppose I should do something. But that way I'm not trying to convince or cajole them or convince them that they're abrasive, nothing. What really convinces them is the motivation from the employer that they have to change, and also the voices of the coworkers coming through with the feedback. That's what really has the powerful effect. So
just a final.
Hi, Laura.
Oh.
I have a new question when
I'll
you're
go
done.
off.
Sure.
Hi, this is Jude. I love your presentation, and I'll work with these kinds of clients. Mm-hmm. Often, one of the requisites the company puts down is that they have to repair a damaged relationship with a key stakeholder, because collaboration is key, and they can't promote the person or reward them unless some damage has been repaired. Right. Do you have any tips on how to help that executive approach? And that would be a threatening situation to them to approach
Right.
someone they've made an enemy with?
Well, you know, I've not had that request. I mean, my thought is that it would be so important to work with the client and for the both of you to understand what is the damage, and that would come through the feedback. And then what we try and do is we try and help our clients get curious, so that they might even engage with the person who they've wounded and try and have more understanding of what did I do or say that was so damaging to you. You know, there's certainly, one can apologize, those sorts of things, but uh, you're talking about restorative justice, I guess, kind of reparations or something along those lines. I don't know. I tend to work more on really wanting the individual to gain insight into what generated the negative perceptions and then to behave differently. And I think that has a lot more power, because when I do the pulse check, they'll say, well, I don't think he's really changed, you know, or I think I'm not sure this is going to last. And actions speak louder than words. So, you know, my focus tends to be more on really helping them gain insight and then demonstrate through their new behaviors that, you know, they're not going to go back. So I haven't had that same request that they have to go back and, you know, repair a specific relationship. So I don't have any insightful thoughts on that. Sorry.
So Dr. Laura, I think Janine has one more question. Her
Sure.
video's live, and this may be our last question for the evening, since we're coming to the close to the end.
Okay. Well, first, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And
yes.
One question I've been curious about is you know, I've worked with some people that are on the spectrum and don't have the same capacity for understanding the emotions of others. Have you ever encountered that? I mean, I don't think that that's a showstopper, but have you encountered that?
Well, I call it kind of cluelessness, where they'll say, I don't understand why people are upset with me, or I don't understand why someone took offense at that. And so first of all, the feedback is enormously helpful in that they understand that. And then I think using that threat, anxiety, defense dynamic, where, you know, they can come to understand what they said or did, how it might have helped, how it might have caused distress. And I think you can help with that in terms of developing their thinking on that. But, you know, we do the best we can, and not everybody's going to become as sensitive through this process. But my view is, let's give it our best shot. You know, let's do everything we can to help this individual, you know, become less aggressive and, you know, more insightful.
Have you had success in helping them to notice behavioral cues, you know, feedback?
Oh, yes. Yes. I mean, I know we have to end, but quickly, I mean, what happens is once you share that threat, anxiety, defense dynamic with them, and it takes about 7 minutes to impart it, what they come to understand, they start reading behavior. So they'll come in a week later and say, you won't believe what happened in this meeting. And I'll say, what? And I'll say, well, you know, the head CEO came in from the galactic headquarters and everybody sat in silence. You know, they were obviously anxious and they were in flight mode, and nobody would speak up about the issues because they felt threatened. Now, this is someone who's speaking in an insightful way, and they're so excited that they can now read and accurately interpret behavior because their empathic capacity is developed by that fairly simple threat, anxiety, defense dynamic. So yeah, it's very enjoyable work. People think, oh, you know, it must be really, you know, different. Nah, it's really fun working with bright people who want to do better and to be able to help them do that. So
yeah, thank you.
Yes, yes. So again, thank you all for the opportunity to talk. You know, I can talk for hours on this, but we don't have hours. So feel free to contact me if you want to continue the conversation.
So Dr. Laura, I really appreciate you coming this evening. Obviously, there was a lot of interest. At one point, we had 28 folks on the call, so this was obviously a high interest in this topic. And we also will be posting this video. So if any of you came in late and would like to, hear the rest of it, certainly stay tuned. I will also let everyone know in the coaching community of practice when that video is ready. So again, appreciate all of your time and energy today. I also just want to invite those who may not yet be a member of our coaching community of practice. It's really easy to join. I'm going to just very quickly share my screen to show you how to do that. It is, you can go to coach.fielding.edu. At the coach.fielding.edu site, you'll see our community of practice tab here, and you can fill out a short survey at the end by clicking on the subscribe button, and stay in tune with all of the up and coming webinars that Fielding offers. You can also check out our blog posts from that same website and read more about all our speakers. Many of them post blogs prior to doing their webinars, and we have a number of webinars already lined up for this year. We're really pleased that Laura was able to kick us off on coaching abrasive leaders. Coming up in 2 weeks on January 29th, we also have a professional series webinar on coaching military leaders and veterans. So we'll have a panel of 3 powerful speakers talking about their work as coaches in the military and with veterans. Followed by that, on February 12th, we have a speaker talking about building resilience in coaching. And then on February 26th, coaching women leaders, we'll have a panel of Fielding alums talking about their work with women. And then on February 5th, we have Dr. Damian Goldvarg talking about coaching supervision and giving a demonstration of the 7-eyed model. So if you're not familiar with coaching supervision, he is probably one of the global leaders in this coaching supervision movement and a former ICF global president. So we're really excited to have Damian Goldvarg join us on February 5th. So stay tuned. We have a bunch of others coming later in the year, and you can always check out our blog posts to sign up and be aware of what's coming. And if you want to watch any of our previous videos, you can click on either professional series videos or thought leaders videos, and the video for tonight will be listed in the thought leaders section, which is primarily about research and cutting new technologies in the field of coaching. So again, thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you on a future webinar and also online in the community of practice. And thanks again to Dr. Crawshaw and sharing her wisdom with us and her research in this.
Thank you, Terry. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the very best. I know with your changing I'm seeing the grief come through on all the communication. So thank you.
Thank you all, and I look forward to our continued collaboration as alumni in the future.
Okay, take care.
Bye for now, everyone.